Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Chief Science Officer Zoom In on Science calls, where we learn about STEM professionals and their careers to understand the impact of their job in modern life. My name is CSO Josh from Arizona. I am personally excited to host today's call, so for all of us to enjoy this experience, please mute your microphones and post your questions at any time during the presentation in the chat box. On past calls, we have learned a variety of different things, and today we welcome Ms. Haylee Mills to Zoom on Science. She works in the field of cybersecurity. Ms. Mills, can you tell our participants a little about yourself and your work, please?
Cool. Thanks, Josh, for the intro. My name's Haylee Mills. I work in cybersecurity as an engineer. And, it's been a weird path to get here. I used to draw cartoons for a living, but I worked very, very hard and I didn't get paid very well. And I'm glad that I followed my dreams. And, it's like, I feel like whatever path you take through life, each part of it informs the next. Like I wouldn't trade my art experience for the world. And I got to experience that and then move into tech. So now I work as an engineer for Charles Schwab, which is a big financial firm here in the United States. And I also, along that path, I was trained by a very close friend of mine I've known since kindergarten, who, while I was working sort of a dead-end job, being like, oh no, what do I do with my life? He was like, oh, you should try cybersecurity. And I was like, well, your artist friend can do cybersecurity. And, he believed in me and I put in the work and now here I am today. And I love my work. Now, there's my name. That's me, security engineer and tech educator. Oh, I mentioned that just because, I was taught by that friend of mine, and I was so thankful that, someone spent the time to help me help myself, that now I try and teach people cybersecurity. I have a weekly class that if anyone is interested in cybersecurity in particular, it's every Sunday. And I can pass that along, but that's my passion to get people into cybersecurity because, I really enjoy it. I think there's a lot of people who don't see themselves as tech people, but I don't think that's necessarily true. I just don't think tech has really, opened the doors and made it look like, yeah, you can do this. That's a little bit about me and where I'm at. My next slide here is just a little bit about what I do as a cybersecurity engineer, because it's really not more complex than finding clues, having machines find clues for me, and learning about sort of what clues to look for. So finding clues, it's like your computer has a bunch of logs on it. It's logging everything that it does so it can understand how to do stuff and what talk to what to do what. And, attackers who are trying to get in your machine and use your machine either to, get money out of you or to use your machine as a hiding place so that they can do bad things over there, and then they can't track that, it looks like you did the bad thing. So attackers like hiding in your machine. So what we do in cybersecurity is looking for the fingerprints that attackers have left inside of our logs. And I mean, there's always going to be ways to get around, we all have passwords and PIN codes and, fingerprint recognition and all these things that do help make our devices very secure. But attackers can manipulate not only the computer, but I'm sure y'all have been on the internet and ran into something that says like, oh, click here and do this thing. And it's not a nice thing that it wants you to do. It's using your click to enable your computer to start doing a thing. So that's a lot of what we look for. I'm going to show just a brief example of how we can look for that with modern tools at the end here. But yeah, then we have the machines find clues for us. So then we're automating, like, hey, machine, when you see like this, do this, and then this, let me know so I can look into that. And so that's what we do on our day-to-day job. Like, I work in a company with 30,000 employees. So there are 30,000 machines creating tons and tons of logs at all times. And if we were to like manually just like poke around, it would just take so much time. So we have the computer, we give it logic to like detect when it sees this and this, let me know. And then, you know, we can build it in a way so we see more and more, we call them high fidelity alerts. Like, when we see this pattern, it's definitely something bad, as opposed to when we see this pattern, it might be bad, but probably not. So we have to build like an engine to decipher all of that data that comes in. And then the third part about that is to, yeah, always learning about the new cool little things that attackers can leverage to get inside of our systems. Because as much as, you know, the defenses evolve and get better, and then the attackers get better at going around the defenses, and then the defenders build better detections. And so there's constantly, like, the field is always changing. You've got to, like, that's what I really like, is that I'm always kind of learning about new stuff. And then my last slide here is that it's team puzzle solving. Like, I'm one person. Our security organization is like 300 people, and we're all doing different like aspects of the job. Like, I'm building the machine detections. That's what I do as an engineer. But there's people making sure that our machines are in policy. There's people writing the policy to make sure that the business has something to check against and make sure that we're operating within secure parameters. We've got people looking at like what attackers are posting on the internet, like reading about like literally where the hackers are talking to each other about, like, oh, I found this tool works really well. And so then they come back to me as an engineer and they're like, hey, do we have a detection for this tool? And so there's so many people working together that I think my time as an animator, which is another thing, there's a huge team effort. That there are just so many people on an animation team to make a cartoon. Like, a 30-minute cartoon takes dozens of people because there's so many frames every second. They have to like split it up. So I feel like the team becomes, you know, you're just a piece of a really beautiful machine. And I found that really cool. And so just to show off real quick, and then I'm open for questions. This is a tool that I really like. Can you see my screen, this CB up in the corner? Okay, so Carbon Black is one of these tools. There are many that do this type of thing. But for example, I've got my home computer, that silly name right here. I just want to look at my home computer and it's like, wow, I've got 22,000 results of things that it's tracking. And what these are all processes on a machine. And I don't know if you've ever had your computer lock up and you have to press Control-Alt-Delete and like click on one of these things and click End Task, because it just freezes and it's broken. So the computer is tracking all of these processes and everything that they do, but a tool like Carbon Black gives us really good detail on something. So I'm just going to narrow in on something I think is suspicious, which is when there is a child process of command.exe, and that's this thing right here. I don't know if you're familiar with the Windows command line, but that's command.exe. So I'm curious, what did command.exe spawn off of? So that's what I'll look for now. And I've still got 150 results. I can see a lot of this update command that doesn't look like it's bad. It's a thing I use all the time. So I'm going to take that out of my results. And now I've got a much smaller list here. So I'm like, looking around. This is Microsoft Visual Studio. That makes sense for a coding program to to spawn a coding type of shell. But this one right here is very weird. Why is an Office program, this is like a free version of Microsoft Office called LibreOffice, why is Office spawning a command shell? So if I go into it, I'm like, whoa, 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 this Office document is launching command, it's killing tasks, it's launching a browser. What is this nefarious thing? And so if I track back and look for the file that actually caused it, I found this document that, oh, when I open it, it says to enable macros. I'm like, oh yeah, I should enable macros. And it looks like a normal document. It tells me there's nothing to see here. This is a normal document that couldn't do anything bad. But that enabling of the macros is what allows it to run things on your computer. So attackers often send these like fake documents that look like something your business might need, and then they start doing their things. And then I find them, and they don't escape. So, I mean, that's just a little demo of just like some of the tools we use and sort of what we're looking for. But yeah, that's what I've got. I'll turn off screen share so I can see people's questions.
Thank you very much for telling us about your work. It is evident that you are truly passionate about cybersecurity. While we were learning about what you do, participants have left questions in the chat, but let's start with the question I had prepared. Who was your mentor as a child?
Oh, well, I bet my parents would be mad if I didn't say them. But honestly, I'm very, very blessed. My mom is a sweetie pie, most non-judgmental person I have ever met. She approaches every person she meets with love, and I feel like I try to do that as well. And my dad really taught me the importance of hard work. Like I didn't quite get it as a kid. Like, you know, I mean, he would still show up to the soccer games and stuff, but you know, he was working a lot. And now as an adult, I realized that, you know, hard work is important to provide for people you care about. And so I feel like I lucked out with my parents. I think I really enjoyed Mr. Rogers. I don't know if people that aren't in the United States are familiar with Mr. Rogers, but he was just a children's show where he was so sweet and he was so like interested in every child he was talking to or every person. It was like he was so there with them. And that's, I don't know, I try to be Mrs. Rogers.
So one more question. What advice would you give to your 14-year-old self?
Yeah, so I think sort of along the lines of Mr. Rogers is to be interested in things. Like I think, you know, well, when I was 14, I was definitely interested in things, mostly video games and cartoons, but like there was so much like in school that I was like, when am I going to use this? Or just things adults would talk about. And, you know, I was just sort of like, you're an adult. What do you know? And I think as I've gotten older, I find that the more I put effort into being interested in every person I meet, especially if I don't understand that person and why they might be that way, I find to me that has made life so much more fulfilling. And when I understand someone or something, I can appreciate the nuance to it a lot more. And that makes it, you know, just, you can always learn more about, you know, things that you don't.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now let's start with the participants' questions.
Okay. Oh God.
I'll scroll. So I'll ask you the questions from the chat. Okay. Let's see. Okay. The first question is from Kelly. Haylee, what was the worst thing you have found, if you can share?
They don't like when you share. Nothing bad ever happens. Everything's perfectly fine at all times. Yeah, not at liberty to discuss such things, but it's interesting that because of the nature of what I do, a lot of times it's finding you're not necessarily finding badness of like an attacker in your environment. You're often finding people in your environment doing things that they shouldn't, or like you're finding ways that things were circumvented in a way that helps you. Like when I mentioned there were security policy people, then I can go talk to the policy people and be like, hey, there's something happening here. And then those people make sure that our systems are configured in a way where that can't happen again. So that's something really interesting that we find. It's more often that type of thing than it is a bad guy.
Okay. Our next question is from CSO Haylee. She said, do you have to know a specific coding language to look through computer logs?
You know, it's funny because I don't like programming. I am a computer engineer and I don't like programming. I know how to do it. I can like read it, but actually knowing how to write it, I think it's important just so you understand the nature of that thing. But my programming is terrible. I would say the skill set that I'm using in security is more like critical thinking. It's like puzzle solving. Like it's like there's a puzzle here. Like what happened? Why did it happen? And so I'm like following clues and like investigating more so than programming. But if you're interested in a language, Python is one of those ones everyone kind of uses. It's one of, there's tons of exercises online. So if you're interested, Python's a good one to start with.
Okay. Our next question is from CSO Priyanshi, and she said, what is the difference between a threat, a vulnerability, and a risk?
Oh no, this is one of those test questions. Okay, a threat is, that's an actual thing that is exploiting a vulnerability. Kathleen, am I getting this right? Yes, okay, thank you. So the threat is the thing that is the actual performer of the badness exploiting the vulnerability, which is the thing in your environment that can be exploited. And risk is the existence of the vulnerability. Like risk, the business is always trying to look at risk as something where they map where it is. And so vulnerabilities in your environment or bad configurations or people, all of these are risks that the business is trying to manage.
Okay. Let's see. Our next question is from CSO Rutik from Kenya. He said, how do you recognize the updates in viruses and malware and then update an antivirus software to then tackle the viruses and malware?
Yeah, no, it's interesting because antivirus is definitely a tool in the toolkit because the traditional antivirus, the one back in the day, it used to just be like, oh, this file has this signature. And then they just built a library of signatures of like, if you see that file, it's bad, don't let it do anything. And that's useful, but now it's moving somewhat into the more behavioral stuff where like, if you see it, start monitoring keystrokes. Like, why is it monitoring keystrokes? Like it's a very specific call to the system. And so antivirus can be like, hey, I don't think that's okay. So what we do, we definitely rely on antivirus because it's like a first line of defense. It's kind of just like basic safe practice to have that. But the most advanced sort of things that we're dealing with advanced attackers is really, they try and hide in very noisy places, or they try and utilize things that if antivirus alerted on it every time, we would get alerts all the time because they're using like something that Microsoft uses all the time to run Windows or Apple uses to run Macs. So then we're building more, we're detecting on behavior more than we're detecting on files, which is what antivirus is really looking at. They're looking at files and we're looking at what those files do to processes that do stuff to the internet or to the registry or to the files.
Yeah. Okay. Our next question is from CSO Chibeni from Kenya. He said, would you recommend your job to people who don't think they are good at tech?
Yes, I would. I think tech's super cool, and I think that, like, the hard part with approaching anything you don't think is for you is that when you start, you aren't even sure what to look at or like what you're going to enjoy. It's like you don't have an awareness of how vast things are or what things to look for in how vast that space is. So I think it can be difficult to start, but I think if you follow, whenever you read about something that you're really interested in, like a lot of my friends go the penetration testing route, which is the like literally hacking a company for the company so that they can fix all their problems. I think a lot of people find interest like, oh, I can hack stuff. And so they start like digging down that road and learning some of those skills. And even if they don't end up being a hacker, they by going in that direction, they learn so many things along the way and they get exposed to so many concepts that, you know, I think just start with whatever sounds cool. And then the more you do that, it will inform your future education.
Okay. So our next question is from CSO Dhruv from Kenya. He said, what is your protocol if a virus and malware gets into your company's servers and PCs?
Okay, yeah, that's a really good question. I love when that happens because then I have a lot of work to do and puzzles to solve. But when that happens, you know, there's like methodologies, like here's the steps of the incident response process, which is like, you know, when an incident happens, first, you're preparing for incidents and like, okay, let's set up our secure configurations. Oh, now something's happening. Let's analyze what's happening. And then we're reviewing kind of like, what did it do to get here? So that we can then review afterwards, where are the places it got through? Are there other places that's happening? So incident response generally follows this cycle of like preparing for the bad thing, found the bad thing, review the bad thing, and then have the review of the bad thing prepare you for the next one. And so you're constantly, the security is always changing and you're always improving your security posture as you find more bad stuff.
There we go. Our next question is from CSO Vivikraj. He said, what is two-factor authentication?
So that's a good one. And yeah, your most important things, anything linked to your bank account or all that stuff should be two-factor authenticated. And you're probably familiar with this as when you log into something you haven't logged on before, it sends, like maybe you linked your phone number to it at some point, or you made like a username password and it's like, you know, it will ask, it will say, oh, we're going to send a PIN code to your email and use the PIN code in your email to log into the account. So the idea is that if an attacker has compromised one of your things, I mean, hopefully not your email, because then they can use it as a two-factor authentication point. But the idea is to, if an attacker has compromised one thing, if they don't have your phone number or your email address, then even though they have the account name and password, they're still not able to bypass the two-factor. Oh, I think you're muted again, Josh.
CSO Vivikraj wants to know, how do you enable two-factor authentication?
It really depends on the service. I think, you know, it's general, like sometimes they tell you to automatically do it. Other times it's hidden in the settings somewhere. Usually whenever I want to do that, I just Google for two-factor and then the name of the thing, because most things tend to have it nowadays, especially like anything linked to billing or your email. But those are some of definitely the most important things to secure, because then when you get a notification that like, hey, you're trying to log into this and you definitely didn't log into this, now you know you need to change your password at that thing, because because someone's attempting to use it.
It's also good to have lots of different passwords. That way they don't get into all of your accounts, right?
Mm-hmm. That's excellent advice.
Our next question is from CSO Drove from Kenya. He said, what is the most dangerous piece of malware or virus that was a big threat and was a thriller for you? Have you ever tried an algorithm to look viruses and malwares online like Reddit?
Okay. Yeah, I think the most dangerous piece of thing I can talk about that was before Schwab. Schwab is fine. We never get those. But I was working at a vacation rental company, sort of like an Airbnb. And they got hit by ransomware, which is where they lock up your computer and then they tell you to send them Bitcoin. And I was studying security at the time. So, it sucked because the business got stopped. We still moved to paper and we were still trying to work, but everything was way slower and just was a bit of a nightmare. So I offered to help because I had been learning security. And after I found where they got in, and where they got in was there's this thing called remote desktop that you can open up to the internet. And it was just open to the internet. So they just tried and there was an account called guest, and it had the password of password 1. And so they were able to get onto this guest account with password 1, which they just guessed. Like once they found that the remote desktop was open, they just kept hitting it until they got a password that worked. And then once they were on, they didn't actually do ransomware right away. They used that computer to buy things on the internet and send them to PO boxes with credit card numbers, like just all different people's credit card numbers. Wow. So then I was able to see the internet history, and they didn't even clear out the internet history. So they were doing that. And then like months later, they were like, well, I'm not using this anymore. I might as well do some ransomware and make some money. So that was kind of cool to see, like, really someone using a thing that I was using too. And then an algorithm to look for viruses and malware. Most of them, there are services. There's something called Virus Total, which is a site owned by Google where people submit viruses or things they think might be viruses, and then it becomes like a database for everyone to use. So I have algorithms in my environment that every time a new file loads on the computer, it checks, hey, what does Virus Total say about that file? So even though without antivirus, it's just checking, hey, does Virus Total say that's bad? So there are tools of things kind of like Reddit, because you like upvote, like, yeah, this is bad, or you downvote, like, no, this is a normal thing. So yeah, that does exist.
Going back to the last question, I was like learning how to use command prompt, and it's like, it's just too easy to access other people's computers. Like you can just shut down their computer just by knowing their host name.
Yeah. Don't do that at your schools, everybody, but we definitely did that at ours.
Okay. So we're at our time limit, but would you stay for a few more questions?
Okay, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's see. The next question is from CSO Malhar from Kenya. He said, are there any programs like Carbon Black that are free and you would like to advise us to use?
I wish there was something quite as cool. There's something, Google has a free tool called Google Rapid Response, which is close, but most of the free versions require you to set up lots of things working together to kind of do what Carbon Black mashes together. But if you're super interested and want a project, you're going to want, and if you're using a Windows machine, but there's other ways to do this, you'll want the ELK stack. ELK, and there's a website called malwarearchaeology.com that has lists of event codes you can enable in Windows, and then you have to forward your event logs in Windows into the ELK stack, and then you can search it as like, you can see this process doing this and that sort of thing. So that is a big project, but that is one of the projects that I did before I got my job. I was doing that at my house in my home network.
That's smart. The next question is from CSO Vivikraj. He asks, have you ever been in those online hacking battles between you and a hacker? Like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's funny because in movies and shows, they often portray it as like literally one person on one end and one person on the other, like, ah, da, 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 ah, da, 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 da. I mean, to some degree that can happen. And honestly, I have never been in that situation, but I have heard of situations like that. And what's interesting is that oftentimes the defender is literally just watching the attacker. Like, they know they are there, they're hands off, so that they just witness, oh, what are you gonna do? Because now they know that they're there. They can prevent them at any time from doing any serious damage because they're literally watching them type commands. So the defender, once you find them, has a huge advantage, because then you're just watching to learn what they do. And after you learn what they do, you're like, okay, well, now you're just poking around, eject. And then now you've gotten all the information. Like, the longer you let them play, the more of their tactics they give away. So I've never personally been in that situation, but yeah, I have friends who have enjoyed that position.
Okay, the next question is from CSO Vertic from Kenya. He asks, what essential skill does a cybersecurity expert require other than a technologically adequate brain?
Yeah, I mean, I like I've mentioned before, tech skills are handy, but I think that the ultimate skill set that I mentioned to Haley is the problem solving, the like puzzle solving, is critical thinking, where you're like, well, if X does Y, then Z does Y, then Y did Z do, and that's sort of like weighing hypotheses against each other. It's like, well, if it's this, then they would have done X, Y, Z. If it's this, they would have done. So that skill set, I think, I mean, honestly, I feel like I got that skill set from playing video games. I don't know if anyone's going to tell you to play video games to get better at cybersecurity, but I feel like when you're put in a video game, you know, like sometimes it can be really difficult. You keep playing that level over and over, but once you figure out the patterns, you're like, oh, this enemy does this. So if I, you know, react this way, then I'm able to, you know, overcome the challenge and reach the next level and that sort of thing. So I think just, I mean, when you're doing something interesting like video games, you can think about that as learning. Like if you realize what you're doing to get past things, that is critical thinking. And another skill is just communication skills. Because you're always part of a team, just being able to like clearly say what you want to say and like getting to the meat of something. Because I mean, when you're talking with your coworkers, maybe you can babble back and forth, but oftentimes when you're talking to someone else, you don't want to overload them with techno gobble speak. You just kind of want to like get them the point so that they can help you. And being succinct and knowing how to write like a good email is a skill I'm still working on. But I think communication skills and just being able to work with other people is really important. I think a lot of people think of hackers as like all by themselves. But even the best hackers that are like hacking big name companies, they're parts of huge teams that are working together to crack the case. Oh, you got muted.
Thank you very much for your participation today. Before we close this call, we have one final question. What advice would you give to us as young leaders for the future?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, I keep coming back to that, like being interested in something. I for some reason, I feel like that's so important to just, you know, it can be easy, or I mean, I get it. Life is tough, and you can get down on yourself, and you can get down on the world, and there's so many things to bring you down. But like the things that you're interested in are something you have total control over, like your learning and your education. and you know, things that make you interested in the world, whatever that is. You know, it can be your dog or the people in your life, or, you know, whatever that is, I think is really important to like really appreciate it. Like, wow, I've got this thing. And I don't know, that's what I keep coming back to, because I think a lot of you will, you know, have lives that, you know, dive one way and then the other. And then at the end, you'll be like, wow, all of those parts were kind of important. So whatever you're doing, just, yeah, get interested and enjoy it.
Again, we thank you for joining us today, Ms. Mills. You are truly an inspiration to many of us, and we hope that you can participate in another call someday as we continue to zoom in on science. CSOs, to close the call, please join me in saying our motto. CSOs, don't just hope it happens.
Make it happen.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Awesome.
much for joining us today.
Thank you, Josh. This was so much fun. And if anyone has any further questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm super available for anything. Thank you all so much.
Josh, you were a great host. Good job, buddy.
Thank you.